There is also questions that seem to be on an international level as well about were we right to sell these key strategic industries off to foreign international companies? That was featuring very heavily on the media rounds. Shall we hear from Jonathan Reynolds on that when he was on Trevor Phillips?
Let's.
A lot of UK Chinese trade is in non-contentious areas, agricultural products, life sciences, or automotive. It's not difficult. I think where as a country we've got it wrong in the past. You had a phase, I think the sort of David Cameron, George Osborne phase initially, it was far too naive about some of this. You had a phase, to be frank, under the Conservative government just before they lost office, where they wouldn't engage at all, and that was inappropriate. We're a real outlier. There was no political engagement. The US has some very assertive measures in place to China, but they do have political engagement. So I think the balance was wrong. I think you've got to be clear about what is the sort of sector where actually we can promote and cooperate, and ones, frankly, where we can't. I wouldn't personally bring a Chinese company into our steel sector.
You would not bring a Chinese
I wouldn't. I think steel is a very sensitive area. I don't know the Boris Johnson government when they did this, what exactly the situation was, but I think it's a sensitive area.
Sensitive areas. What about nuclear power, for example?
Look, I wouldn't want to, on an interview, make that kind of specific determination, but I think we can't ignore China. I mean, China's a fifth of the global economy. What they do has an impact on us, and where we can have areas where we can cooperate in our mutual interest, I think that is a good.
But there's a high trust bar now, isn't there?
Yes, we've got to recognise that. And again, I don't want people to think that this particular situation is more than just the company itself. But companies operate in different environments. And look, what we were offering to not have to recall Parliament in terms of the offer around raw materials, the British government making sure there'd be no losses if Xingye purchased those, actually then increasing the generosity of that offer. Any company, I think, operating in a sort of rational economic manner would say that we'll take that offer.
Yeah, I think that he is there echoing things that maybe we've seen more China hawkish MPs in the past, like Ian Duncan Smith, raise. Nigel Farage perhaps was engaging a bit disingenuously with this on Laura Kuenssberg as well, saying that, alleging quite libelously possibly that they had intentionally bought this industry to close it down, and again was playing this kind of protectionist, Trump-esque rhetoric about industry in relations to China. Speaking of, I saw something really interesting, or have been seeing something really interesting on TikTok regarding Chinese manufacturing and the Trump tariffs. I don't know if you've seen it.
The AI slop videos of Americans making the things that Chinese people make.
But those are funny. No, it was basically all the manufacturers that manufacture for big American brands like Zara or it's not an American brand, but like big international brands that are being affected by these tariffs, are now like showing the inside of the factories and being like, look, this is how much we manufacture it for. It's so cheap to buy if you buy directly from the Chinese manufacturing companies, but you're getting upsold at this really high price when you're buying it in American retailers. And they're doing like exposing videos, but they're all over my TikTok, and it's only recently appeared. And I was like, this is so interesting on an app that is also a Chinese-owned firm.
Yeah. Well, they're going to just put a shop front in every sweatshop in China now to sell direct from there.
That's what I was also thinking. I was like, wow, these factories, they look very nice inside. Their workers look very happy to be there.
Yeah. I wonder if they were selected especially for this. But no, China is going to be the foremost power in the world in, I think, is it the 50-year plan that they had, or the 100-year plan, where the Chinese Communist Party's goal for 2100 was to be the world's foremost power, replace America as it. I think
they might meet that goal early.
Well, they've revised their target to like 2050. Like, they could not. I think there's a guy. He might be an economics advisor in the CCP, who wrote a book in the 1990s about China. It's called China's Century, And the book is essentially mapping out how China will become the world's foremost power. And it kind of maps predictably how things would happen, but it doesn't predict things like Donald Trump. It doesn't predict things like, I'm not saying Brexit was one of the most significant events.
Like external shocks.
Exactly. Not predicting these things, but still being on the trajectory to be the world's foremost power. Now getting to a point where the West, when it comes, that point is kind of half-baked, I suppose. It's quite interesting how we ourselves have gotten ourselves into the place where we are paving the way for Chinese domination. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing is for somebody else to say. But I find it super interesting how the debate around particularly
Steel?
Yes. Xingye has been that they have purposely bought this industry to run it down, to destroy British steel manufacturing, to destroy this, to destroy that. Whether that be true or not, can you trust any other country with your critical national infrastructure and to guarantee that the jobs of some of the quote unquote left behind communities of your country are going to be looked after by a foreign company, whether it's a foreign company or a foreign country? They don't have the same vested interest as you. So it doesn't matter if it's China. It doesn't matter if it's India. It doesn't matter if it's
the
Italy
US.
or the US.
Yeah.
Or they only have a bottom line in mind. Like, I mean, particularly when it comes to Scunthorpe, Tata used to own it and sold it for £1 to the gang that owned it before it was put into public ownership briefly before it was sold.
Special administration measures. Yeah.
So, I mean, with this whole debate about Xingye, it's kind of, I think it'd be useful to remember that Tata had that site and saw that they weren't profiting from it. I'm not saying that it will never be profitable. You can certainly make it profitable. You can certainly up production on the site. But point being, Tata didn't have the intention to do it, sold it for £1 to somebody else who then had whatever interest they had. But Tata have kind of been held up as this comparison to Xingye of like, well, Tata understand what it means to do business in Britain. Do they really? They've just sacked thousands of people in Wales, you know?
Yeah,
Like,
it's quite me reaping, me sowing me reaping energy that they, you know, we're happy to take advantage when in a global race to the bottom for cheaper labor prices and cheaper consumer prices. But now we're reaping the costs of that.
Yeah.
And like you said, whether it is China or the US, because I mean, Ava did the interview with Angus Hanton on Vassal State, which is about how US private equity owns essentially everything in this country. Even things that you think of as being British or British made are actually at the top owned by American private equity. And then in return, that absolute impact and influence that the US has over British politics. But the way we talk about China, like it's this outlier with sinister influence over the UK. It's no more sinister than the US and no more influential than the US. But the way that we talk about it is incredibly different.
Yeah. I mean, it was kind of there was another line that Reynolds had when he was introducing the bill where it was the claim that Britain is a global superpower, whether it was in terms of steel or whether it was terms in just generally being a superpower. And what it made me think, what does being a superpower mean in the 21st century? Does it mean that you were once a very important player in the world? Or does it mean something like what you're saying about America, of having your tentacles in every facet of every single country in the world and having everybody singing off your hymn sheet? Is it what China has been doing with the Belt and Road Initiative and by buying up things like the British steel plant? Or whatever it might be. I certainly believe that being a superpower isn't having your steel manufacturing owned by Indian and Chinese companies, by having your train systems owned by Deutsche Bahn or Trenitalia or SNCF, or having your water system owned by private equity, or having your nuclear arms owned by the Americans, essentially. None of these things make Britain great.
Definitely not.
And you can't turn around and say we're taking back some sort of autonomy and we're taking back some sort of. You've got a long way to go before you get to any phase of being a strong player in the world, given that everything is owned by somebody else.
Should we wrap up chats with Scunthorpe there, or is there anything else you'd like to add?
I'm happy with that. Are you happy?